Welcome to the live series interview. This is based on the live series teaching. If you have not had time to watch this, please follow us on our Facebook and YouTube and podcast. My name is Giovanni and
I am Sion.
and today we have Jan Nichols with us sharing a little bit on sharing your faith.
Yes, we are so excited to have Jan Nichols with us. Jan has been with YWAM for 29 years, is married and has 4 children. Jan does international and national work with YWAM, and I think one of Jan's desire is that people come in, have a revelation who Jesus is. So Jan, it's so good to have you with us here.
Thank you.
And I know that you do a lot of magic tricks. What is your number one favorite magic trick that you do?
Good question. So one of my favourite tricks that I used to do a lot, particularly in schools, was I used to do this trick with a biro pen where I'd put it through my lip and blood would gush out and then I'd sign my name. And I remember this one time doing it in the school, and this kid on the front row was sat on this seat and he fainted and he came off the seat like a ski jump and was out cold. And I was so embarrassed because it was the first time I'd ever done anything in this school.
Wow.
And it was one of these schools where the headmaster had, the long robes and walked around, and you thought, oh no, I'm never going to be invited back again. And apparently this kid had an eating disorder, and actually it had caused him to faint. And so the headmaster was really thrilled because it had highlighted an issue with this pupil.
Wow.
And so at the break time, he came up to me and explained all of this. And then he said to me, if next time you could make the whole pupils pass out, then we wouldn't have anything to teach them for the rest of the day.
That's
so
amazing.
From a very strict headmaster, he made a very funny joke. So
Wow.
a lot of fun.
Well, look at you. I've seen a few of your magic tricks, and it's quite fun. So, Yen, we've watched your series on sharing your faith, and for me, this topic is so. When I was watching it, I was like, I get so anxious about sharing my faith because sometimes these things come naturally to people. For me, it doesn't come naturally to go out and share the gospel. So when I was listening to you, and it just helped me, and just to be able to go and do this. And one of the things you mentioned was motivation. I found myself, some days I have the motivation to go and share the gospel, and some days I don't. Can you go a little bit deeper into that, what that looks like, and how we can continue to have these motivation?
I sure can. So I would say there are 2 aspects to that. Firstly, I would say I don't know anybody who is naturally good at sharing their faith who hasn't worked at it.
Yes.
So, some of the evangelists that we know, or, the Billy Grahams of this world, and Billy Graham is a good example. He preached 2,000 sermons to the tree stumps when he was at Bible college. So he practiced how to share his faith over and over and over again. And I think as Christians we don't realise that actually the key to getting good at anything is just to practice.
Right. Yeah.
And the reason why it might not seem very normal to you might be because you haven't practiced enough. So just practice. Practice what you might say to people. So I would say that, and then I would say the other key to motivation is the reason.
Right.
So why do you want to share your faith? And traditionally, for a lot of people, it was a kind of it was a black and white thing. We must do it. It was a legalistic approach, and I actually don't think that's right. I think actually, when it comes to prayer or worship, we consider those things to be lifestyle things.
Right.
And I think sharing our faith also needs to be the same thing. And that needs to be the motivation. Why do you really want to share your faith? We want to share our faith because we have this wonderful relationship with God.
Right.
And it means so much to us that we feel compelled to tell other people about who God is, rather than out of a duty or a responsibility or a thou shalt must do X, Y, Z,
right.
which I don't think actually helps people. So Michael Green, who's a canon in the Church of England, put it like this. He said, if the fire's in the belly, you don't need any methods.
Wow.
Really great. So, if we've got that motivation, that excitement, that joy, then actually we don't need any systems or formulas. Actually, God will just speak through us.
So
And I think that's important.
That's so good.
Yeah, I guess motivation is really important, as you were saying, because if you're not motivated to share the gospel, it means you're not motivated. You need to get more into the Bible and get more into this fire of sharing it. And one of the next topic that you mentioned was being creative into it. Could you unpack a little bit more as well, like what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, if we look at history and creativity in the church, it's full, particularly in the UK where we're based in England. You know, theatres were born out of churches, mime, clowning, circus, all of those kind of art forms were all born out of the church. The first pastor to the king was the court jester, and his job was to remind the king that he was a normal man as well as the king, and he was the only person that was allowed to do that. And he would retell Bible stories, and so that's where we get juggling from. Juggling was actually the Trinity being explained from the court jester to the king. So it was a plate, a cup, and a saucer, all made from the same substance, but one thing. And this was the way that the court jester would remind the king of who he was. This is where magic came from. So the parable of the lost coin was actually the first magic trick that was retold through the disappearing of the coin. And this is how the court jester would retell these Bible stories. So we have so much creativity in our history.
Right. Yeah.
And yet when we might look at the magazines that we do, or the leaflets that we put out in church, or compared to what the world might produce, we're sort of a bit behind. Whereas actually God is a creative God and he lives in us, so we should be not just catching up, but we should be leading the curve like we have done in history. So what are some of the new ways that we can reach people in this time of this pandemic that's been going on for, it seems like, forever, and will continue for quite some time in terms of some of the after results? People are using the internet in ways that we haven't used before. So how can we reach people over the internet? How can we be praying for people? How can we be connecting with people? And it's one of YWAM's values as well, doing new things in new ways. So we're in a kairos moment where we can actually think a little bit differently in our creativity. So what are some of the new things that we could be tapping into that come out of who we are, but also God speaking through us? So creativity is really important. I think it opens the door to allowing people to see God in a different light.
So for myself, you mentioned adventure, and I think this whole being in this Christian, having faith is an adventure. And can you give us an example of an adventure that you've been on with sharing the faith?
Sure. I mean, our life as Christians is an adventure. I think. I think so many Christians don't necessarily communicate that or allow that to come through their lives enough. For me, I could tell you one story. I was on outreach in Newcastle, in the northeast of England, and I woke up, I had my time with God, and I felt like God told me that I was going to meet three young lads around the age of 12, and gave me their names, which doesn't happen every day to me, but on this occasion, so I'm like, okay, well, let's see if this happens. And around sort of 11 o'clock that day, there was a few of us. We were talking to people in the centre of Newcastle, and I met these three guys. They looked exactly how I had this picture in my mind, and their names were the names that I'd felt that God had given me. And I had this great conversation with these three guys. We talked for nearly 2 hours. At the end of it, I said, "Have you ever considered becoming a Christian?" And these three lads said, "No, we haven't." And I said, "Well, would you like to?" And they said, yes, they would. And I said, no, I'm not sure you really understand what that means. So how about come tomorrow, 3:00, see that cafe over there? We'll meet there, 3:00, and I'll buy you a Coke. And if you're serious about God, then we can talk some more then. So 3:00 the next day comes, and these three guys show up. I buy them a Coke, we sit down, we talk again for just over an hour. And I asked them the same question again, would you like to become a Christian? And they said, yeah, we actually really would. And I said, I'm not sure you're ready yet. So maybe if you're really, really serious, then come back 3:00 tomorrow and I'll buy you another Coke.
Clever.
So 3:00 the next day, and as I was walking towards the cafe, I noticed the guys up the street, and they're having a bit of an argument, and I thought, oh, what's going on here? So I walk in the cafe, they notice, and so they come in after me, and they say, look, yeah, we've been talking, and we've decided if you don't introduce us to Jesus today, we'll go and find somebody else who will.
Wow.
And what it meant was it built a desire and a hunger within them. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily the right thing to do with everybody all the time. But it showed me that this adventurous story, this journey with God, is so full of life. And if you could hear these guys as they prayed and they confessed when they stole a Mars bar, and they there were tears coming down my cheeks as I listened to these guys genuinely have an encounter with God, and it was very precious.
That's amazing.
That's really a cool story, and yeah, just like a journey, and a life with Jesus is always an adventure. And as much as you walk with Him, the more you get into learning about having this adventure with Him. And the next topic that you mentioned, I guess, is for every Christian, is prayer. How prayer is important, I guess. For a Christian, you have to pray every day. It's just like a routine of your life. But when it comes of sharing your faith, what do you mean more into it?
So there are two aspects again to the prayer. I think we can all pray for our friends, for our family members, for people we know, acquaintances who don't know God. Quite often at night when I pray with my kids going to bed, that we will often pray for our family members or friends at school or people that they know who don't know Jesus, and we will pray for them, that they would have an encounter with God. So there's just this point of just regularly praying for our friends and people who we want to see to become Christians. But there's also there's a category of people who seem to have a specific anointing around praying for people and seeing them become Christians. I have a friend of mine, she lives about half an hour away, and she has a list of 10 names, and she prays for these 10 people, and in the space of 2 years she sees 6 of them become Christians.
That's amazing.
Wow.
And then so every 2 years she renews her list and gets 10, adds 6 more to it. And she started getting very strategic and started putting names of key people like government people and people from the council and police force. And she's actually getting very strategic in terms of who she's feels like she should pray for. And so for some people, they've just got a gifting and an anointing to pray and to intercede and to stand in the gap. And see something shift with people. But the truth is often with a lot of our prayer, we don't see the result. We don't necessarily always see it firsthand. But I'm pretty much convinced. I'll give you a good story of when I did see the result, but many years later. It was probably about 3 years ago. I was speaking in a church in London. And a 21-year-old young lady came up to me and said, "Hi, my name is," she introduced herself, and said, "When I was 8 years old, I was at Spring Harvest, and you were on the stage, and you were telling people about Jesus." And I became a Christian that day, but at the same time, when I stood up, I heard God speak to me for the first time. And God said, I'm going to be a missionary.
Wow.
And she said, it's really funny that you should come to church today and come and speak. I haven't seen you since I was 8 years old. For the last 6 months, I've been working as a missionary in London. And so encouraging that, through that prayer moment, that God speaks to her. I was on the stage. I didn't know what God was doing. I'm praying for people.
Right.
And years later, you see some fruit. But often we don't see the fruit, but we still pray and we still believe and we still trust that God has got it in control,
Amazing. I think this is an area for me, like, I want to get better with prayer. And also, I think I'm a type, I would pray and I would want God to answer the prayer now, and that's
Right.
not how he works. He wants to have faith, and, and I think one of the things for me too is when it comes to sharing my faith, if, you get different people, like when you go to different people sharing their faith, some people will react a certain way and some people, might turn you away or whatever, but to stay, to love them still, and I think you touched on about loving one another, and I'm sure you have many examples of you going up to people sharing faith and you've been turned away, but not to let your heart get hard. Can you touch a bit on that, like how we can still stay engaged and want to continue to share in the gospel and not feel, rejected?
I think that there has been a criticism. I don't know whether I want to say it's fair or unfair. I think of every statement there's truth in it and untruth in it.
Right.
But of Christians, which is that we love people until the point where they decide that they don't want to follow God, and then they're not our friends anymore. And I find that really difficult. I want to ask some questions. Some of the questions I want to ask people are, what would the world look like if we loved people as Christians for no other reason other than the fact that we just loved them? What would our streets, our neighbours look like if we loved them for no other reason than the fact that we loved them? And obviously, with things like love languages and things like that, people express love and receive love in different ways. And so you might be trying to love somebody through a particular way and it doesn't seem to be getting through because it's not how they receive love.
Right, yeah.
So some of it is the relational aspect of actually getting to know people and trying to work out, how to love them, how do they receive love. So, for me, acts of service is one of my love languages. It's not my wife's love language. So, if I have worked my socks off and I've cleaned the house totally, and I've got a big smile on my face and my wife's been away for the day and she comes back, she doesn't even notice.
Oh,
Yeah,
that hurts.
it's not that she doesn't notice,
No.
but it's not her love language, so she won't necessarily feel it in the same way. But if because her love language is quality time, if I sit down and give her some time and listen to her and hear her out and pray for her and do that speaks so much of her love. So how do we love the people in the streets that we need to love, and what does that look like?
Yeah, also part of loving one another comes for the next topic that you mentioned, which is to get to know unbelievers. And I think like for Christians, sometimes Christian they prefer their circles to be only Christians and don't have unbelievers because they want to increase on their faith. But how are they going to be sharing their faith if they don't have unbelievers to be telling them? And could you just mention a little bit more into this area?
Sure. So there are probably two ways that we can look at this, both formally and informally. So formally, what are your hobbies and interests? What clubs are you connected with locally? I'm connected with some clubs because of my kids and things in the town, and have natural interests in things. And so I will kind of connect where my level of interest is. But there's also informally. So if you go to a supermarket or to the bank, or do you go at the same time every other week? So every other week is really important. So if you go to the supermarket every other week to the same till, and it's really important it's every other week because that's the cycle of their work.
Right.
So actually then you get to see the same person at the till, and then you get to know that lady's name or his name. and then you can pray for that person, and then those little snippets of conversations build up over the weeks and the months, to the point where actually you make a friend, and then through that friendship you can ask some questions about God and to do that. So I think sometimes we think that we've got to go on this special sharing our faith mission time, whereas actually it needs to be in our everyday lives, and part of our everyday lives is actually connecting with people who don't know God. And some of them may become Christians, some of them may not. That's sort of not irrelevant, but it's sort of not as significant as loving people, because if we love people and we share with people, it's sort of up to them whether they want to become a Christian or not.
Right.
But if we give people the opportunity, then we are actually really loving them to have that opportunity to have the same kind of relationship with God that we do.
I'm so glad that you touched on this, because I was talking with Giovanni and saying, like, for myself, I grew up in a Christian home, went to a Christian school, and it almost felt it was not okay to have a non-Christian friend, you know? So I was so glad that you unpacked that, and I think it is important to have non-Christian friends so you can bring them to the Lord. I've learned so much, you know? So just wrapping up here, what does it look like sharing the gospel in a hot climate culture and a cold climate culture? You know, Giovanni from being a hot climate culture, and you and I being from a cold climate culture. For me, I found myself, and I don't know, Giovanni, if you want to speak on this, I found it easier to share the gospel when, you know, with a warm culture. You know, they talk to you and they come to you, and where I come from is very reserved. So can you like go into a little bit what that looked like for you, and what that looks like?
Yeah, I think the longer we are Christians and the longer we have a relationship with God, I think we become more relational,
right,
as beings, because God is a relational being, and therefore relational cultures, warm climate cultures, it becomes so much easier for Christians to share their faith in that kind of environment, because that seems to be normal. But there are some windows of opportunities in our, so like at the moment with the pandemic, people are taking longer to do everything. So shopping takes longer, everything takes longer. You're in queues, but people are interested in talking more now. Whereas I noticed previously people would just be, I'm going to this shop and this shop and this shop, and then I'm going home.
Right, yeah.
You can't do that now. So actually it's forcing us in this kind of situation to be a bit more relational, and people are hungry for relationship because they've been locked away for 12 weeks or however it was. And I think that's going to continue for at least another year, if not longer.
Wow.
And I think we can see that through 20% of people who are watching Christian services or podcasts or things online are non-Christians in this country right now. We've never had as many non-Christians of their own volition for a long time kind of seek out God themselves. So it's an encouraging time to be able to think that way. But traditionally it has been challenging in our kind of climate for people. But there are moments of opportunities. And I think the trick is, whether it's warm climate or cold climate, is recognizing when a conversation is ripe to develop it and to ask questions and to have an opportunity to love on that person, and take the time to do that.
Wow. Thank you so much, Yen, for sharing with us. I have learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. We can see the fire in you and the passion inside of you of sharing your faith to others. And I think that's what Jesus has called us as Christians to do, is to share our faith, to share the gospel. And the gospel should be something that fires us up to do that. So thank you so much. I have been impacted, and I hope you have been impacted as well. And if you have not subscribed, please do it so, and keep looking up. There's more coming. And yeah, thank you so much. Goodbye.